It's Apologetics Live with Matt Slick and Andrew Rappaport, part of the Christian podcast community.
All right, we are live, Apologetics Live, and we are glad to be out here. We have some open Q&A, so if you have some questions and want to get them answered, anything apologetically, whether dealing with the Bible, whether dealing with atheism, Mormonism, Jehovah's Witness, anything that you want, will be up for discussion. We may have a friend come in and talk about what we're going to start off with. I'm going to start off with a response that I'll have to an email that I got last show. So last week when we were doing our show, had someone that emailed, and we're going to respond to that email and show you the importance of doing original research. Not a lot of people do that because, well, it takes time. It's harder. And we're going to show you the importance of doing that. Now, I'm Andrew Rappaport from Striving for Eternity Ministries, host of the Rap Report podcast. That's Rap with 2 Ps. And so you can go and listen to that. Go to any podcast app, get Rap Report, put it in with Rap with 2 Ps. Andrew Rappaport's Rap Report 2 are going to show up. Rap Report Daily is a Monday through Friday, 2 minutes. So if you like short daily stuff, that's for you. Go get that. You can get that on a regular basis, Monday through Friday. If you prefer something longer, well, we have the Rap Report. That's about an hour long each show, and we will do more of that. Going to do more things on that that we can't do in 2 minutes. So go out and check them both out. Now, Matt is not with us, at least yet. Probably, maybe not tonight. We're going to see. Matt, as some of you know, is been packing and trying to get himself, basically get himself ready to move. And so hopefully we will have him back. But by the time he gets back, as he gets his move underway, I will probably be in the Philippines. So we're going to be having one or two of us for May. We're going to see. We will have some special guests that are going to be coming in while I'm gone. Dr. Anthony Silvestro is going to be coming in. So that will be really exciting, especially for those of you who particularly like creation science, because that's his expertise. And he's going to focus a lot on that. So that may be something that you want to check out and make sure that you're listening those weeks. And if you're not aware, this show is a podcast as well. So if you go and search on podcasts for Apologetics Live, you can get the audio of this every week as they drop. Usually they drop the next day. So I want to give time, at least to start. I'm going to share screen here. Here we go. So I got this email, and let's see, I'll close that down so it's not as distracting. And I want to read this so you can see this is the email that we got, and I'm not taking it out of context because I know how the Black Hebrew Israelites, or they call themselves now Hebrew Israelites, like to respond and claim that people are taking them out of context and fun things like that. Let me just do this real quick so I can get I can see the chat here. Okay. All right. There we go. Excuse me. So, and I see that the author of this email is here in chat, or at least watching. He's welcome to join, and we'll see if he can defend his arguments after we show the arguments. But here's what he says. I'll read it to you. He says, I have seen the founder of this website debate my fellow Israelites, and I would like to take the opportunity to prove why so-called black people are Hebrews. I would like to display why the so-called blacks are true Hebrews and show legitimate sources for the Kaza theory and dispute the Samaritans never left argument. Now, first off, I don't know the Samaritans never left argument. So I didn't make either of these arguments. So he wants to challenge me on something I didn't say. Okay, but I find that this next part kind of interesting. I expect a detailed essay in response. Otherwise, I consider my stance as an Israelite true by forfeit, and mind you, and my mind will never be changed. Okay, so here's something that you get with folks, and I want to point this out so that you can see how people end up arguing. All right, let me bring this back onto me. So, excuse me. So the thing that you see here is he makes an argument that if I don't give a detailed response, in other words, if I don't give a response that's satisfactory to him, then he's right because it's not detailed enough and his mind can never be changed. So what's the argument for truth in his mind? Well, himself. Because notice, if it's not detailed, a detailed essay. So if I wrote like 15 pages of absolute and utter nonsense, but it's very detailed, would that prove that he's wrong? Actually, no, it wouldn't. I tried to illustrate that to him by just basically giving him a quick response and telling him eventually that if he responds to me, if he responds to this email, then that proves that he's trying to convince himself he's right, and therefore I'm right. That was the argument that I ended up making with him, is to say that if he responds, that proves I'm right. That's a bad way of arguing, by the way, but it's something that people will do because, well, they lack an actual argument. Now, I'm going to show, let me click back to sharing the screen so you could see what his argument is here. Now let's see what this detailed argument. He was very upset with me that I responded quickly. I gave him an answer. I basically told him he was a joke and not worth my time because I actually have things to do. Obviously, he doesn't. Now he thinks that this was a very detailed argument that he made. He says, "Now I will prove that Adam was black," and he's going to base it all from this book. I guess I can't. There we go. He's going to base it all on this book, Biblical History of Black Mankind. Now, I want to show why doing original research is important. He believes that this work that he put together, all from one source, mind you, from the Biblical History of Black Mankind, he's going to make all this argument from there. Okay, he's going to give some videos. By the way, you got to love when a place calls themselves realhistoryww.com. I mean, that's got to be classic. If a group has to call themselves Real History, it usually means nobody else is saying this because they can't support it any other way. So it's kind of one of the things like when people have to claim their own intelligence, right? So let's just look. This is not going to take very long to debunk. It's actually in the very first sentence. Now, this is one that I'm going to spell out some of these things for those who are listening on podcast. So in this book, Biblical History of Black Mankind, Chapter 1, page 5, he says that C. McGee Livers states that who is Adam? Okay, so this is from that resource. And it says, quote, "The Hebrew word for Adam, A-D-A-M, is Adham, A-D-H-A-M. That's going to be important. He's adding the letter H in there. That becomes important. And is phonetically pronounced Adham, A-D-H-A-M. Now, he goes on to say, in biblical days, a name said a lot about an individual. According to Brown Driver Briggs' Hebrew Lexicon, page 10, the word Adham means dusky, tiny, to have dark skin, thwarty, shadowy. It also means mankind. So notice here what he did. He says that Adam really should be pronounced Adham. Well, here's what I would like to do if we can. Just go to, let's go to the Hebrew. Let us start. For those who can see on screen, I have my logos up here. We go to the word Adam in our English. We'll right click here so that we can get the word that is there. And we'll do a quick word study on this. And what do you know? It comes up as Adam, A-D-A-M, no H in there. So what we could do very quickly is click on the Brown Driver Briggs. And as you can see, for those who are watching, here's the Brown Driver Briggs. So you see exactly what I'm pulling up. This is what this gentleman didn't do. Notice, if you will, in his email, it just says Brown Driver Briggs Lexicon, page 10. That's interesting, because what we end up seeing is when we go to Adam, the actual word, we see here it means man or mankind. So definition number 1 is a man or a human being. Definition number 2 is man or mankind. Definition number 3 is first man. And definition number 4 is a city in Jordan, in the Jordan Valley. Nowhere does this say anything about shadowy, dark skin, none of that. That's because this is the actual word Adam, which is how you would pronounce it, not Adham. You see, what he did here is he fell for a very simple trick, and he thinks this guy is so scholarly. He didn't check the work. If he would have checked Brown Driver Briggs, he would have realized that this guy, McGee Livers, who wrote Biblical History of Black Mankind, he would have realized right away that the guy's telling falsehoods, because that's not what Brown Driver Briggs is saying. Brown Driver Briggs is saying that the word Adam means mankind. Now, he goes on to add the letter Ha for the H sound. When he goes to his, when he's going to his thing here, and for those who can see, if not, I'll spell this out. But notice, he's saying A-D-A-M should be pronounced A-D-H-A-M, giving himself a new word. And that word can mean, now that word happens to mean not dark-skinned, but just dusty, okay, or from the earth. So what he does is, this gentleman, whoever wrote this book, Biblical History of Black Mankind, what he's done is done a bait and switch. He does something that sounds really good, that Adam in English should be Adham. But if you, again, look at this, let me show you. This is an aleph. That would be your A sound. This is silent, a silent vowel. This is your daleth for your D. Here is the A, and that's the M. So Adam, okay, when you have this, so these are going to be basically what you have for the letters. You don't have an H sound. An H is, let me see, I could probably pull this up real quick, because we'll give you a quick, I bet, here we go. I don't think I left it up. Here's the alphabet. So here's your aleph. He's arguing that this letter is in there, the hey. Do you see a hey anywhere in this word for Adam? No, you don't. No, you know why you don't? Because it's not there. Because that's not how you would say Adam. And so what he's done here is he has fell for a bait and switch. He fell for something that, unfortunately for him, he's believing is legitimate, and it's not. So I feel bad for the gentleman who is trying to argue this way. It's a bad way to argue. You should not be arguing. You should do original source material. Okay. And when you do, you end up seeing that things like this are not legitimate. Now, if he wanted to come in here, I know he's in watching, and he was commenting earlier. I don't know. I'll see. So he's still commenting, but he's not in here. Now, obviously, it's easy to get in here because we got 3 other people who are in. But this is what I want to show you with this is, excuse me, when we do this, I want you to recognize how easy it is to disprove these arguments, because Brown Driver Briggs does not say that Adam means shadowy, dark-skinned, or any of that. Okay? And that is an easy way for anybody how to be able to just, if someone mentions they have a source, go back to that source. Don't accept, what was the name of this book again? Biblical History of Black Mankind. Don't accept that as if that's all you need. Okay? Because what we end up seeing is when people do that, they don't go back to the original source, and you may be fooled into thinking something, as this gentleman was. He's fooled into thinking that Brown Driver Briggs actually teaches what he thinks it teaches. And this is why I would say that the guy is a joke, because he hasn't done basic stuff. I didn't even have to get past the rest of this email. The rest of it was just as bad. But the reality, because it's all based on that assumption. And yet the assumption's false. So that's the thing I want you guys to see. It is important to do original research. It's one of the things that makes my job difficult, because that's what I do. When someone gives me articles, I don't just take their word for it that someone else said what they said. I go and research that. That's what you do when you're going to do original research. You're going to find that there's a lot of times that these sort of things you can easily pick up are wrong. Okay? And so this is important to do. Now, unfortunately, this gentleman doesn't want to come in here and discuss this, but we're going to see if maybe he will later. He's probably he said this took him so long to respond, so long to type up, and therefore I needed to give him a detailed response. I didn't need to go much more detail than that, right? The basis of his argument is based on a falsehood. I just showed you Adam means man, mankind. It doesn't mean dark-skinned. Okay? So we're going to add in, I added in Manager 01. Let's see, let me bring your volumes up. Where are you? All right. So you can unmute yourself. Let's see. Don't know if I can unmute you. There you go. Hey, do you have any questions for us tonight? Oh, he muted. I just unmuted you. You remuted yourself. So go unmute yourself there. And see, when I'm doing both host and both roles here, I'll unmute you again here if I can. Let's see if that works. There you go. So Manager 01, do you have any questions for us tonight? Okay. I think he said no, he doesn't have any questions. Shake your head if you said no, because he said it quick and we didn't hear. He was the first one in. I just wanted to make sure. I will try to watch the chat if you end up having a question. There were a bunch of folks chatting away in the inside chat here. I'm going to add Kat. You were in next, so you can unmute yourself. And I know you mentioned something about a Bible earlier. It's hard to read two different chats when I'm also trying to read my own screen to to talk about this stuff. So how you doing, Kat?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Better than I deserve.
Oh, well, yeah. I guess I could say that too. Now I'm shamed. Okay, yeah. Well, no, I wanted to ask, because today I was the first time somebody posted a scripture that was automatically generated. And it was from the, what is this called again? Lexham English Bible. Mm-hmm. It was Isaiah 28:10. Really it was just 10. And how that read was, for it is blah, blah upon blah, blah. Blah, blah upon blah, blah, gaga upon gaga, gaga upon gaga, a little here, a little there. And I initially thought the person was being disrespectful to the scriptures until they pointed out it's actually a translation, a version of the Bible, which is a little different from like in the ESV, for it is precept upon precept, precept upon precept, line upon line upon line, here a little, there a little.
What verse were they looking that up in?
It is Isaiah 28:10. And so my concern was not really what the scripture itself is saying, but for me to see a Bible where it is translated as blah, blah upon blah, blah. I just wanted to know what, if anything, you knew about the Lexham English Bible, because it seems a little disrespectful, in my opinion, and I could be viewing it totally wrong.
Yeah, so, excuse me, the Lexham is the only familiarity I know of the Lexham. I first came upon it when it came to the to Logos Bible software. And that's what they use. And yeah, I just looked it up to confirm. That's, by the way, what we were talking about earlier, what we do when we do original research. You say it, go check it out. And yeah, it says that in verse 10 and verse 13. That's a very interesting translation that they did. I'm not too familiar with the original translators here that did the translation. I know, I don't know. The only time I ever hear of Lexham is tied to Logos. So I don't know if this comes from the Logos scholars. I'm trying to dig that up right now to see who it is.
I don't know. In the footnotes, it says specifically for that scripture, I'm reading, in this context, the Hebrew expressions, and I don't know how to pronounce it, TSAW, and QAW are likely meant to sound like baby talk, but they could mean command upon command and roll upon roll. So I don't know. Like I said, I got a little, hair on the back of my neck went up, and I kind of, blah, blah. Scripture does not say blah, 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 blah. So
yeah, they're saying that this is for a smoother translation. Let's do this.
Oh, thank you, Charlie, for that link.
Which, let's see, Charlie is quick with the links.
He's awesome. He is the link information resource king.
I am convinced that Charlie knows. I'm convinced that Charlie knows the CARM site better than Matt Slick. I'm just convinced of this, because he has those links for CARM faster than Matt can get them at times.
Seriously.
So let's see if I could share screen. And I will share that Bible. I should probably make this larger for folks who are watching. Because it's probably kind of small. All right. So here this is in the English Standard Version. And if we take a look at precept upon precept and look that up, okay, it comes up here as, actually, not used too many times. Most of it right here in this Isaiah, actually all of them except for one in this Isaiah 28. So precept upon precept is nothing or worthless, vanity, destruction. And so if you look here, I'll enlarge that for folks so that they get an idea. They can read this. But as you see there, it does say blah, blah upon blah, blah, gaga upon gaga. And so it does seem that they're thinking, and this is this other word here. We can quickly pull that one up. And it says that this means Babel. So, okay. Line upon line, actually, which is interesting, right? Because if the word here means Babel, where it says line upon line, if that actually means Babel, then maybe blah, blah, and gaga make more sense. If precept upon precept is meaning vanity or nothingness, as maybe you could see, it's worthless, as you can see from the word. I think they're trying to emphasize, my guess, the translators, maybe to emphasize its meaninglessness and its babble. Now, this would be really hard for those that are the Hebrew Israelites, because they turn to this passage all the time to say this is how you interpret the Bible. And they always focus on the here a little, there a little, because they say you have to grab a little here, grab a little there. That's how you're supposed to do your. I wasn't sharing, was I? I just noticed that.
Yeah, you weren't sharing at all.
Well, let me go back. Why didn't that share? Google Hangouts sometimes.
Yeah, it's glitchy. When you get a chance, also check out John 1:1. That's a little odd.
In the Lexicon?
Yeah, in the LEB. Yeah, but but go ahead and show everybody this one right here. This.
Okay, now you want me to show everyone this one?
All right, whatever you want. But I mean,
so here you see it's
wow.
Upon Gaga, and if you see the meaning of the blah blah there is worthless or nothing, and the Gaga that they translated is Babel. The English Standard Version has it as precept upon. Actually, almost all translations I know do it precept upon precept, line upon line, here a little, there a little. The King James would be similar. So that's kind of interesting.
Isn't this the verse that the Black Hebrew Israelites use to determine how their scriptures?
Correct. They will use this one part. Now, this is the thing. So let's bring up, just for, since we're talking about the fake Hebrew Israelites.
Right.
Since they don't want to be called black because they say they're not black, we'll refer to them as fake Hebrew Israelites because they're not Hebrew Israelites. So we'll look at the Holy King James Version. We'll make that a little larger so it can be seen. And for precept must be upon precept, precept upon precept, line upon line, line upon line, here a little, there a little. Now they focus just on this, the here a little, there a little, and they will argue that's how we're to interpret scripture. We take a little from here, take a little from there. That's how you interpret. Well, that's really bad.
Oh, no, yeah.
Because if you look at this, it's saying, it sure looks like it's saying, in English at least, you build one precept upon another precept, one line upon another line. And, looking, because I haven't actually looked into the Hebrew here until today with this, but, maybe this is a better translation because if the word is nothingness, then what this would be saying is, for nothing must be upon nothing and nothing upon nothing. Babble upon babble, babble upon babble, here a little, there a little. Now, when you read this in the context, right, you see that for stammering lips, it's going to talk about nonsense. People that try to use doctrine and they create it out of nonsense. Now, that's the context there, which is, I think, kind of interesting that the Hebrew Israelites always want to go to this, because if they actually read now, we understand they focus just on line upon line, on here a little, there a little. They focus just on that to say, hey, you're supposed to grab a little bit of the Bible here and a little bit there and slam them together. We call that proof texting, by the way. When you grab different passages of the Bible out of their context, slam them together, that's called proof texting. That's not how you're to interpret. That's a bad way to interpret. They do that all the time. And they argue for this, so they say, oh, you're not supposed to read the Bible as if it's a novel. That's exactly how you're supposed to read it. So let's take a look. John, you said John 1:1.
Yeah, check that out. See if that's a...
In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Okay?
Wait, okay. On their website, it shows... On their website, it shows this. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, was with God, and the... Oh, okay. Never mind. I totally missed it. I misread it. And the Word was God. Okay.
Okay, so Vocab,
never mind
how he can come in. So Vocab, go to apologeticslive.com. There's a link to join there that you can join us. I was hoping that Vocab would come in. I should give a shout out to, let me try to read this. Full Belly Bear. Full Belly Bear gave $4.99 in a super chat. He says he's currently reading your book, Vocab. So Vocab, you have someone that's out there reading your book. and I actually need to get a copy. I should ask Vocab when he gets in here. How do I get a copy? For folks who don't know, while we wait for him to come in, Vocab is probably, I don't know anybody who has researched fake Hebrew Israelites more than Vocab. Jason Manning just gave a $5 super chat. Vocab needs the Google Hangout link. How about freestyle with Andrew? So I will just drop the link in here. There's a link, Vocab, or anyone else that wants to come on in. How do I get that to go away? So Vocab Malone has probably done more research than anybody I know with the fake Hebrew Israelites. I know that they love to challenge me because, I'm actually an Israelite. They don't like that. And the way you can tell someone is by their, from their genealogy. You go and you ask who's their father and their father and their father and so on and so on and so on. And when you can trace your line all the way back, then that's who your genealogy is. So I don't know if this is Vocab or a Hebrew Israelite. They're coming in with some Hebrew is their name, and the font is way too small for me to read. So you could just unmute yourself. Looks like I am. Okay. So I am. I'll just call you I am. You can unmute yourself. Or not. There you go. What's your name?
Javier.
Javier, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Good. What's your background?
I'm a Christian, live in California, currently in college.
All right. Now help me out because the font is way too small for me to read this in the screen. What's the Hebrew? I can see it's Hebrew, but I can't read that.
It's just the name of God.
Yeah, okay. So the I am, I was like, oh, okay. All right. So do you have any questions? You have any questions?
Well, I was just listening to you guys talking about the other version.
Oh, okay.
About the blah blah and blah blah.
Okay. Well, if you have a question, you can just unmute yourself and jump on in. Vocab is here. By the way, Full Belly Bear just gave a $1.99 super chat saying, haha, fake Hebrew Israelites. Now, Vocab's probably going to get on my case for calling them fake Hebrew Israelites and tell me I got to be nicer or something. Vocab, how you doing, brother?
I am doing all right. Can you guys hear me good?
Yes.
Okay, excellent.
Is that a flying spaghetti monster hat or something?
No, this is he's called the Lookout Guy. So back in a day, I used to be a amateur graffiti artist. And so this guy's got really big eyes and a couple spray paint cans, so he looks out if you're doing graffiti art. That's who that is. Since you asked.
Well, I figured if it wasn't that, it was going to be I thought it'd be some pop culture reference. I wouldn't get it. John would come in here laughing. I don't get pop culture. But so Vocab, before you came in, I was responding to an email that I got last week, and the gentleman, or I'm assuming gentleman, was in the chat. So he was watching my response, but didn't come in to respond. He basically was arguing that the word Adam, that we would say in English, is properly pronounced Adham and means dark-skinned, dark or shadowy. And it can also mean mankind. So we were going through the Hebrew there for the word Adam to show it actually just means mankind. So first off, before let's give folks a little bit about you and where can we get your book?
It's on Amazon, and it's also on a website called thebookpatch.com. Those are the two places.
He's going to reach for it. Give the title of the book. I don't know what you did with your lighting, but man, it made you look like you were.
It's called Barack Obama versus the Black Hebrew Israelites, and I'm trying to adjust my lighting. Is it better now?
Oh yeah, before you look like it. Actually, I don't know what you did with the lighting. It was really cool because it just but everything behind you is white. Made you look angelic.
I could do it again.
Yeah, I mean, you look at when you had if you turn the camera where you had it before. Yeah, hold on. We can get the.
But there's the book. It's got a nice glossy cover, and it's called Barack Obama versus the Black Hebrew Israelites because there's a movie scene that was like Obama's biopic, and there's a brief scene where he argues with some Hebrew Israelites in this biographical pic that was on Netflix. And so I said, that's a good title for the book.
I have not seen that video. I'll have to
it's not, it's an actor. So I don't know if it happened, but he did walk through Harlem when he was at Columbia. So it's hypothetical that it could happen, which that means Obama is the earliest apologist against Hebrew Israelites.
Well, I don't know about that because I think I know that I've been arguing with him for longer than he's been president, but I don't know.
I'm just kidding.
Hey, we just got a super chat from Soldier for Jesus Christ, $9.99, and it says, "God bless you, brothers, in Jesus Christ." So a lot of people wanting to give that extra 99 cents or just wanting to save a penny. So you've done vocab, I think, more research on the fake Hebrew Israelites than anybody I know. What got you studying this particular group out?
Well, so they first appeared on my radar when they started showing up in my kind of in my neighborhood in my old city, which is Columbus, Ohio. And they started busting into churches in the middle of services there. And my friend who was in the neighborhood, I had moved to Phoenix already. He told me about them, and he said, do you know who these guys are? And I did not know them at the time, but I looked them up and found out, and I said, whoa, because this is about a decade ago. I said, this is some religion, And so I just kept it in my mind, but I never saw them or ran into them until one day in Phoenix, I did see them. So I said, let me go talk to them because I actually know a little bit about them. And it was just a wild conversation. I recorded the audio and I said, maybe people will be interested in this, even though I don't think anyone knows who these guys are. So I uploaded it and everybody wanted more. They wanted answers, and so I was like, well, let me give you some resources. So I'd go around and look for resources. And I realized there's not really very many resources on these guys. What do I do? So I said, well, I'll just do it until someone else steps in. And then I kind of just ended up getting stuck there.
Well, when you say they're busting into churches, were they busting into African-American churches or white churches or either?
Predominantly historically black churches. They would come in, tell everyone they're Israelites and they need to keep the law. And if the congregation didn't accept it, which they never did, because you can imagine, they would curse them out in their fake Hebrew language. And then they would leave right before the cops came. Okay.
Now you brought up the fake Hebrew language. So let's talk about that because they do. I remember one of the first times I had someone on the street try to tell me I don't know Hebrew. They did it because they gave this long paragraph or so in something that sounded sort of Hebrew, but not really. Right. And I could not discern almost no words.
Lashawan Kodash.
Yeah.
That's what it's called. It's called Lashawan Kodash. Most Hebrew speakers cannot make out what they're trying to say.
So where did this come from?
Well, this is something I never usually do, but since I'm writing about this, I'm going to see if this makes sense if I read something that I'm working on writing. And I think it will explain it. The main difference between Lashawan Kodash and modern Israeli Hebrew is that the former does not possess the vowels O, E, or U, nor does it have consonants that produce the sounds for V. The one vowel that Lashawan Kodash has that is not present in modern Israeli Hebrew is an I, as in pie or kite, which is only produced in the ayin, the 16th letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Proponents of the Lashawan Kodash dialect assert that this letter can only be pronounced as an I. In other words, they believe, and then I got a little chart here I'm working on that kind of breaks down the way they pronounce each letter, and I'll just read it to you here because you'll see this is their alphabet pronunciation. What I'm reading here: ka, ya, ta, cha, za, wa, ha, da, ga, ba, a, ta, sha, ra, ka, taza, pa, I, sa, na, ma, la. That's their alphabet.
Blah 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 blah.
And so their dialect comes from the fact that Lashon Kadesh means holy tongue. But since one Westers, this is the certain type of Hebrew Israelite who uses this, they pronounce it Lashon Kodash. Similarly, they pronounce the popular greeting Shalom as Shalom or Shalom. With regard to their salutation, one of the groups who broke away was called the House of David. They underwent some evolution, and they used to do Shalom back in the mid-90s, but then they realized there was a Vav in there. So they switched to Shalom and later to Shalom. That's hard to say, Shalom. Over time, then they basically admitted this group particularly, this is one of the split-off camps, that they didn't know Hebrew. And so now they just say Shalom. So a lot of times when one of these groups will break off from the One West variety, their language will undergo some kind of change as well. Like GOCC, they're the only ones who call Jesus Yeshaya, whereas everyone else calls him Yahawashai. But yet they're still a One West Hebrew Israelite group. It's a common thing they do. Since none of them know Hebrew, they'll make these weird changes sometimes when they break out. And some of them just become pragmatic. IUIC, even though they hold a Lashon Kodash, they say, well, nobody knows it, so we'll just call them Christ like everybody else. And their name is actually Israel United in Christ. They don't even use the Lashon Kodash, even though they still hold that it's valid. So it's a big mix-up thing. But there's a lot of Hebrew Israelites who aren't involved with this, and they either want to learn real Hebrew or some of them actually learn real Hebrew. But those are not the guys you encounter on the street.
Yeah. Now this form of or dialect of Hebrew we see, I think the earliest we see it is in Harlem in was it the 60s?
Yeah, and there's some debate about that because Abba Bivins is now understood to be the originator of it in some way. But up until recent times, everybody thought a guy named Arya was the originator. Arya had some kind of vision or dream. It's a little bit unclear. You have different versions of the story, and they're all oral, usually from former members, sometimes from current members. And it basically is he saw a black man or a black angel speaking a language he didn't understand, and he said, "What's that?" And he said, "That's the language of your forefathers." And then he had the Lashon Kodash alphabet basically from that. But it's come to light, really, the Abba Bivins was bringing out this language, although it wasn't really in full force at the beginning stages of the camp. And so that was slightly before. So it's unclear exactly when it fully developed because this group, the One West variety of Hebrew Israelites, these are the guys on the street. These are not all Hebrew Israelites, but they're the most militant and visible. Prior to that, they had broken off from a group called the Commandment Keepers, and the Commandment Keepers fancied themselves related to the Ethiopian Falashas, and they actually engage in trying to learn real Hebrew. And so this is sort of actually a devolution where now you have this Lashon Kodash. And it's just one more way to say we're not affiliated with the Jewish stuff, basically, because then they call modern Israeli Hebrew, they call it Yiddish.
Which we do have a Yiddish, and it's a mix of Hebrew and German. I grew up hearing that in my household. But this is one of the things a lot of people may hear if they encounter these guys on the streets. And they'll hear people say, well, Hebrew went out of convention. People didn't speak biblical Hebrew, and they spoke a Yiddish, and therefore no one, the people who claim they're Jewish and claim that they speak Hebrew today really don't speak Hebrew because nobody knows what it sounded like, and they claim that they have the proper pronunciation, and therefore everyone else is wrong. One of the things there's some truth to this, that the majority of Jewish people would speak a Yiddish dialect and not Hebrew, as they do in Israel today, speaking a Hebrew. And the thing that people have to understand, though, is in synagogues, the rabbis still spoke Hebrew. They would still read in Hebrew because that's what the Torah would be in. That's what when they're reading from the scrolls, it was in the same Hebrew. So they've been doing that in the synagogues all along. And so they would have the pronunciations having passed down. So it doesn't have to be the common tongue of all Jewish people for it to be lost completely. I mean, it's kind of like people would say that, I'm trying to think, like with Latin taking over with the Catholic Church, when people would speak Latin, and therefore to then argue that we can't know what Greek sounds like because no one speaks that anymore. That'd actually be a better argument than the Hebrews try to make, but because not as many people spoke Greek, but Greek was still spoken. And so you can figure out how to pronounce it. I think when they try to make this case that the Hebrew language speaking it died out until they kind of revived it, is just not a good way of arguing, because we have rabbis in synagogues for centuries who have been speaking it, and therefore they would be able to keep the pronunciations. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, the history is good to explain and break down, because most of them sort of have a caricature of Jewish history, especially in the modern era, and a lot of it is based on a revisionist history that's partially of their own devising, and they generally just don't accept it. And so, one time I brought some of this up, and I said, the first teachers at the old Commandment Keepers school, and even Ariyah, there's an old picture of Ariyah. This is, again, the guy who's credited a lot of times with bringing out Lashon Kadosh. There's an old picture of him at a bar mitzvah. Now, his father was bringing him there, who was also involved with the Commandment Keepers, but that's significant. It shows there's a rabbinical Judaism influence on the early days of even the modern Hebrew Israelites. So we brought out, all these guys that you look up to, they learned whatever Hebrew they knew from mainly Ashkenazi Jews in the United States, or from their grammars sometimes, but a lot of times from like exposure to rabbis and Jewish synagogues. And when we bring that information out and kind of explain why that's an argument partially against their position, because one group of people are retaining the language and the other one is not, they actually, one of their main defenders used this elaborate analogy. And forgive me, I get it partially wrong. I'll give the short version. It was something like this. The folks who, I think in Japan, who had originated jiu-jitsu, and if someone knows, please correct me if I'm wrong, they essentially, over time, forgot how to use it and the finer points of it. And it was sort of a lost art with the place in which it originated, but it was still practiced in Brazil. And so then when the people, I think it was the Japanese, again, excuse me if I'm wrong, wanted to regain the knowledge of their own art form that they had originally invented, apparently a lot of them came to Brazil and studied under people like the Gracies, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, to understand their own lost art form. He actually used that as an analogy to say, so we had this language, we didn't retain it, but this other group of people who were ultimately imposters, they retained it. And so we're picking it back up for them, but it doesn't necessarily mean we're not the people and they are. If that makes sense, that was an apologetic.
They make. Yeah. Well, I want to clarify some terms, because for people who don't deal with these guys on a regular basis may not know. And I want to do two things. You've mentioned a whole bunch of groups. I want to get to that because that's going to be a longer thing, but define for folks what an Ashkenazi Jew is and they make that distinction.
So, Andrew, correct me where I'm wrong, but here's here's the way I would put some of these things. There's a such thing you might call, scholars that study this call modern Jewry, Jewry, and it means we've had a spreading out diaspora, and so because of that, people all the way back from the 70s, the 130s, all the way back, the first and second century, have spread out all over the world and went different places. The short version is those who kind of went through Europe and stayed there for a really long time, those are Ashkenazi Jews. So they have a similar phenotype. That means a display of their genetics, the way they kind of so-called racial characteristics that look similar to Europeans. But a lot of times in the West, that's what we're accustomed to seeing.
Nose. We have a big nose and the dark curly hair. And you know why we have a big nose, by the way, right?
I mean, I'm Italian, so I can't really say nothing, bro.
We have a big nose because air is free. Okay.
Okay. Well, I don't know the reason why we have them, but Mario and Luigi have big noses for a reason in their caricatures. But so when you look at that, the thing is we're kind of limited a lot of times. I think in a perspective of what modern day Jewry is, because we see primarily, especially in pop culture, the Jerry Seinfelds, the Larry Davids, the Larry Kings, people of Ashkenazi Jewish descent. But there's a few things to remember about that. As far as the ethnic features, it's a mistake to say first century Jews look like identical to Ashkenazi Jews. And it's also a mistake to think that Ashkenazi Jews are the only kinds of Jews, because there's Sephardic Jews, that's mainly Spaniard descent, and some of their traditions and other things are different. It's not an identical. There's Yemeni Jews. There were Iraqi Jews. They're almost all gone. And if you look at Iraqi and Yemeni Jews, they don't look the same. However, when we do a lot of genetics, we see matches between these different groups. And there is at least one group in South Africa / Zimbabwe who matches up, especially in the male priestly clan of this group in Africa, called the Limba. And everyone was surprised when they showed that these folks had up to 50% Levant DNA on the men's side. It was sort of a shock, and they have traditions that kind of match. But ironically, a lot of them are Christian, the Limba people. But they look different than Ashkenazi Jews, and somewhat to the Sephardic, and definitely to the Yemeni, and definitely to the Iraqi. And then you got Moroccan Jews, so folks in North Africa. The closer you are to the Levant, generally speaking, even though there's been some Arabization, it appears, the more likely it is you look as if that's the main thing, but look probably to a first century Jew from what we can tell. And the reason why we say that is because there's something called bioforensics. They go and they take first century adult male Galilean skulls, and they can get a general idea, and they look pretty close to Iraqi Jews. And again, they're almost gone now. There's Iraqi Jews is now sort of a thing of the recent past. They're almost left. But the reason why I had to look at this stuff is not because I had a deep desire to know some of those things. It's because I had to deal with Hebrew Israelites. And so it's countering their truth claims. Now, ultimately, it's the gospel. What is the gospel? Who is God? But along the way, you defend, move on. Because their obsession with who are the people of the book, it doesn't become your obsession, but you need to have some facility to answer it if you're sort of specializing this. I'm not saying everyone needs to do that. I'm not saying. I'm just saying for me, it has to become something that I'm, learning constantly about. And so I hope that was helpful to what you were asking, Brother Andrew.
Well, I want to because you just mentioned it's about the gospel. So let's get into, because someone had asked in the chat what it is they believe, and this is going to be hard because for folks who are listening, or the thing you have to understand, and I think Vocab could do this, if you haven't figured already, he's mentioned several different groups. The thing that I think makes this so hard to research these guys is they're not a single, group think type of, and there's some things that they almost all have in common, but very little. They're like all over the board when it comes to their theology and what they believe. And it's going to depend on which group you're talking to. But could you go over at least some of the basics of what they would believe that would be different than what we might believe? I mean, some will say they're Israelites. Some will say they're Israelites that are Christian. They'll claim Christ, but not all will.
Yeah, that's a minority position. We'll say we're Christian. Sometimes they'll say that's minority position. They'll say we're the original Christians or something like that. But
yeah, and
yeah, most don't.
Some accept the deity of Christ. Some don't. Right. So could you just give like an overview of at least some of the main things maybe that they would all pretty much agree with, and then where we would see some differences, and then where would we differ from them?
When they're New Testament acceptors, if they accept the New Testament, most of those guys are close to a King James only position or heavily favor it. That's a common thing. Almost all of them that I've ever met, because it's a big deal to them, reject any other modern day claimants to being ethnic Jews, so whether they're Sephardic or Moroccan or Yemen, I mean, they reject everybody. Most of them have some form of ethnic hierarchy built into their system. So some it's very crass and base, and it's like this. ISUPK, for example, will say, you're going to go into hardcore slavery, Esau, and the other nations will be there with you. The Arabs and the Asians and the Africans will be there with you, and you're going to be in hardcore slavery. And that's going to be your lot for the rest of eternity, something like that. Others say, no, you guys are going to be brothers with us in the kingdom, but we'll have a relationship that's sort of like husband to wife. They've been given different offices of position and leadership, and Judah out of Israel always must lead. And that's why Gentiles cling to the garments, citing an Old Testament passage, of Israel for entrance into the household of faith. So they basically, when they have that view, they replace Christ as the mediator, and they put Israelites in the place instead. But they'll say, you can be our grafted in spiritual Israelite brother. But a lot of times they don't let you teach. And people always focus, and I understand, they'll say white people. Well, most of these groups, though, they have a whole othering system. Othering, where you kind of do a xenophobic maneuver to put someone over there. Well, as I mentioned, Asians, Indians, like East Indians, Pakistan, India, they're all Arabs as well. People of European descent and some other groups too. So it's not just, white folks or whatever. It's whoever they other. But the ethnic hierarchy is a standard feature of, there's a softer version and a harder version, but it's a standard feature of all the groups. A rejection of the Trinity, I know of one exception, and they're the group that looks closest to Christianity, and they're not influencing, the guys out on the street necessarily. When it comes to the deity of Christ, a lot of times they haven't thought carefully through it, mainly because it's not a very important issue to them. And some of them will say yes, but you got to understand some of them are henotheistic, meaning they actually have other gods in their system in a way, kind of like a Jehovah's Witnesses schema. And it's a little unclear sometimes what they understand by divinity in terms like that when you ask them about that. And so that's an issue. In salvation by works, some of the groups are crass, where, you're earning your salvation. Others are a little more sophisticated, where essentially it's more like alchemy. They're like, no, we're saved by grace. But then you must do the works of the law, or you don't retain that grace, or some weird hybrid version. So as they spread out, some of these groups are getting mildly more sophisticated. And so you got to kind of ask them what they mean and see what's going on. And sometimes they do this. I'll give you an example dialogue. And this is the last thing I'll do, because I mentioned several things that are kind of held in common. The Christian might say to the Hebrews, like, are you saying that the Bible doesn't say that we're justified by faith apart from the works of the law? And the Hebrews might say, what do you mean? Well, you just got to have both. We just read that. And then the Christian will point to Romans 3:28 and say, well, it says right here, therefore we conclude that a man is justified by faith without the deeds of the law or works of the law. And the Hebrew Israelite might say, yeah, that's the works of the sacrificial law. You guys don't understand that works of the law is talking about the sacrificial law. And they'll say, what do you mean by that?
Talk about that.
Well, for example, Christ is our Passover, so we celebrate Passover, but we don't have to sacrifice the lamb or things like that. So they have this strange thing. They'll say, oh, the law is done away with. And a lot of times when they read it, they'll actually supply the word of sacrifice. They'll say, so, the law is obsolete. The law of sacrifice is obsolete. You know what I'm saying? They'll do something like that. And they're basically saying you don't have to kill animals anymore. So,
well, interpretation of scripture is a big problem that they have throughout. You mentioned the othering they do. One of the things I think when it comes to logic, I find so interesting. They will try to argue. You mentioned line of Judah being important. They will have groups. They'll say the Africans that were in the slave trade and came to America are from the line of Judah. Those that are in Jamaica, I forget where they basically argue that the tribes were taken by the slave traders and dropped off at different locations by their tribes. I find that to be one of the funnier things that they try to argue. And not all of them argue that, but those that do, I find it so interesting because when they do, it's like, wait, are you telling me someone who is kidnapping somebody from another country and his major concern is to keep the tribe together as they ship them across the ocean to sell them as a slave? Like that, they're going to make sure that they keep all the tribes of the same together. It's like, just logically, that's not going to work. So
if you give me a second, I've got a great quote on that, man. I hope I can find this.
Okay. Well, while you do the quote, let me. Someone mentioned in the chat about the reference. You quoted someone else referring to jiu-jitsu. And so someone was asking if giving a little bit of a correction, and I can confirm it. So jiu-jitsu was founded in Japan. There's a Japanese jiu-jitsu and there's a Brazilian jiu-jitsu. Brazilian jiu-jitsu is really from the Gracies, at least the way the story goes from the Gracies. I forget which Gracie it was that physically could not compete. He just sat and watched as they practiced jiu-jitsu, and he was really practicing. They were doing a Japanese jiu-jitsu. And he would watch it, but he couldn't actually compete because his health from a child was told he wouldn't be able to do exercise. And there was a time where, no one could teach the classes. So he started teaching, but because he just was observing, he actually had, he noticed different things of the techniques to improve because he was watching it and not practicing it. He picked up on different things. And that's actually what started what's known as Gracie Jiu-Jitsu or Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It became, I guess when it came to America, they were calling it Gracie Jiu-Jitsu because it was the Gracie family. And it kind of became synonymous almost with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, just because of the fact that, people were calling it Gracie Jiu-Jitsu in America, even when it wasn't specifically from the Gracies. So there was back some time, I think there was a difference between the Brazilian and the Gracies, but I think that's pretty much just mangled up now, and people don't. I mean, there's people refer to them interchangeably, and so. But yeah, I don't know that they lost it. Thank you, Jason. It was Hilo Gracie was the one. I'm going to assume that Jason does some jiu-jitsu. So
I was also going to kind of point out, since we're talking about Black Hebrew Israelites, when I first started learning about them and doing the research on them, YouTube is not exactly the safest place to do the research. I found out because you will hear a lot of racial insults and slurs, and it is quite embarrassing, and it's pretty bad. I mean, there are some groups out there that are pretty harsh when it comes to speaking with other Jewish people, or even like other black people. I mean, if another black person does not agree with their theology, I mean, they are completely given all sorts of insults because it's pretty bad.
Yeah, most of the training that I've seen that they get is on YouTube. I mean, there's tons of stuff on YouTube. And yes, when it comes to someone like me, who I will say I am an Israelite, I am Jewish, they really have a problem with it, and they get very irate. And yeah, the language can be very, very racial. Someone was commenting in the chat stuff that, and I've heard this myself, that some of them would say that we're, eventually we, the white people, are going to be the slaves of these folks. To put it the way the one guy, it's so interesting. I called out one guy for his language because he was claiming he's an Israelite and yet he's using foul language. I called him out on it, and the leader, they have like a hierarchy, and the one leader was telling him to watch his language. But we got the video of their video. They put it up online, and when we walked away, they were screaming. Like the one guy was going, "I can't wait for the race wars to start popping so we can get these crackers being our slaves and raping their women." And that's really you end up with some of the groups. They are so not only racist, I mean hyper racist, but their view is really a revenge for something that none of them actually suffered. I mean, none of them were actually slaves in America, but it's like this. They want to get this reverse, kind of a reverse justice, as if that somehow is gonna that they're somehow going to be the slave owners. And the interesting thing with it is nowhere in the Old Testament do you see where the Israelites are going to be, as a part of God's blessing, that they're going to be owning other people as slaves. And so it's one of the things that they say they're Israelites, but it's one of the things that I would see different. They don't quite follow. Let me just give a quick shout out to Jason Manning, who says he gave a $2 super chat. Andrew Rapport and Vocab freestyle. Freestyle has to do with some hip hop, if I'm not mistaken, and Vocab can do that. Maybe you don't want to hear me rapping. Rappaport. That's about as close as I get to rapping.
Yeah, it's right there in the name. But actually, this is where more of their doctrine comes in. You said something that none of them suffered. They believe in reincarnation, so they did suffer it.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I haven't heard anything explain that.
Yeah. They believe that Jesus is Adam, Solomon, Isaac, and I forget who else, for example. Some of them even believe that.
Well, hold on. So they believe that he's Solomon and not David? Because that would be interesting.
It appears so.
Wow.
And they used to teach one of their teachers, who's now dead, a guy named Mashah. They taught that he was King David reincarnated. And so when he broke away and started his own school, he called it the House of David. But that's important to consider. And then I found this quote that was relevant. You mentioned about the transatlantic slave trade. It's a very short quote, but it's very interesting. This is General Yohana speaking. He's the leader of the ISUPK, which is the Israelite School of Universal Practical Knowledge. Listen to this quote. Quote, slave traders sailed for months and days to get to specific points. They knew what people they were taking, specifically the lost tribes of Israel, end quote. So they actually think like Esau, whoever the slave traders were, essentially is, working in this wicked way where they know who they're getting.
Yeah, which is, I mean, I just don't picture guys that are involved in slave trades caring about that. Right? And then the other thing that I always find interesting is when I'll talk to someone, was everyone who was an Israelite, were they part of the African slave trade? And I've had a couple of them that will say yes. if they were a slave, that means they're part of the African slave. Oh, yeah. And when they say that, I just turn and say, okay, so you're telling me you have a brother and a sister, or a brother and a brother, or a sister and a sister, and one of them is an Israelite because they were captured and taken over as a slave and the other wasn't.
That's where they'll hedge their bets. If you ask them that, some of them that have thought about it will say, well, there could be some remnant left among the Hamites. And so that's why some of them are doing missions to Africa now. But, you mentioned about there's no place where it says Israelites will own slaves. There are passages they use for this. And, if you haven't heard these, it can be tricky. So Isaiah 14 is probably the most common one. For the Lord will have compassion on Jacob and will again choose Israel and will set them in their own land. And sojourners will join them and will attach themselves to the house of Jacob. And the peoples will take them and bring them to their place. And the house of Israel will possess them in the Lord's land as male and female slaves. They will take captive those who were their captors and rule over those who oppressed them. So that's a key proof text. There they say, what do you mean? We are going to have slaves. So they'll point to the ones, and there's some other ones like that they'll point to, such as Revelation 13:9-10. This one's especially egregious. The Isaiah 14:1 could be a little more challenging. The Revelation 13:1, though, actually it's not going to translate it as well as far as for their purposes in the ESV, because the ESV is more accurate here to the grammar. But you still get the idea. Revelation 13:10 says, if anyone is to be taken captive, to captivity he goes. If anyone is to be slain with the sword must he be slain. And the KJV rendering of it makes it sound like you hypothetically could look at it as, if anyone enslaved, they'll now be enslaved. And if anyone captured, they'll now be captured. But that is talking about on a lot of interpretations, depending on your interpretation of eschatology. But that, well, even if you want to make it more general, you don't even have to get into the eschatology. Basically saying during times of persecution, whoever God has deemed and predestined and foreordained to experience certain levels of trials and tribulations and persecution, that's what they'll experience. That's what the passage is actually about. It's saying God knows who will experience what, and it's God's will who will suffer in what way. It doesn't have anything to do with if you captured somebody, now you'll get captured. But that's how they render it. Yeah.
And let me, there's a guy, Israel Rise, that's the guy that sent the email. I'll challenge him to come on in, go to apologeticslive.com. There's a link to join. You could join, and if you think that you can make better arguments, because he's saying he wrote he's going to, I guess he's going to email you, but he's got a more legit argument. But, there's the thing I find interesting about this vocab is I've had for, I forget how long, a couple of years, all of these guys that were telling me they want to debate me, and they wouldn't show up. I don't know if you remember the debate that I did, sort of debate. And folks, you go Striving Fraternity's YouTube channel and look up Black Hebrew Israelites. You'll see two debates out there. The first one was really to show that none of them were willing to show up and debate. And I basically debated all the guys that said they would debate me, and they all showed up, and we showed an empty chair. And I debated an empty chair. But it did get, someone to show up, and I did actually get a actual debate, and I think it went well because he really did make his points well. And I didn't quite know who he was, but you actually knew of him. Actually, I think you called me at like 2 a.m. to talk about it once.
Did I? I do not remember, to be honest. Who was it?
It was, I got to look up his name now.
If you show me, I don't remember. I'm so sorry.
No. Well, I remember you calling me at like 2 a.m. and that was when it was you. Who else was on the call? It was you. It was there were two others. Oh, I can't remember who. And it was an accidental Skype call, and you guys were just talking about that guy that I had debated. Zodak, I think was his name. Zadok?
Zadok?
Yeah. Let me look.
Oh, Zadok. Okay. Okay.
You don't remember that?
Yeah.
In the middle of the night? Wait.
Well, we're on West Coast time. You're on East Coast time. Sorry. Zadok ben Israel.
Yeah. Yes.
Zadok. Yeah.
He and I actually debated.
That's good. He's not a one Wester. He wouldn't say the thing about hardcore slavery. In fact, here's his analogy. Well, I think I already gave it, didn't I? Where I gave the husband and wife relationship. That's his analogy for the Israelites and other nations at the end of days. So he wouldn't have the hardcore slavery position. He actually does Christian hip hop. So he's been in churches and stuff and goes on tours and stuff. And I don't think most of the churches know what's going on with his theology. So I've made a couple of videos where I try to let people have a chance to know what he teaches and believes. But yeah.
So there's a fellow, Andrew, here. He's from a land down under, and he said he's got a question about slavery. So let me...
Yeah, that's my friend Andrew Graham. I know Andrew.
That's me.
Yeah,
that's me.
What's up, bro? How you doing?
Question. Yeah, well, my ceiling is up lately. If it's not up, then I'm dead. Otherwise, I'm well. But my question: Abraham had Eliezer as the first slave, essentially. How do they reconcile that?
What do you mean exactly? I don't. How do they reconcile?
What would they have to say about that? Would they have anything to say about that?
I guess they would say that's how it should be.
Okay.
Essentially. So this was interesting. Ask them, is slavery wrong? Mm-hmm. And if it's one of the guys who believes in hardcore slavery for the other nations, they can't actually say objectively, morally that, chattel slavery or brutal. They can't say it's wrong. It really just depends who's doing it to who.
Yeah.
Although we know in Abraham's case, because we see the relationship with Eliezer, in fact, he was going to possibly become the heir. It wasn't like antebellum slavery, but that's what they would say. No. Saying, that's the order of things. That's the order of things.
Okay, and I thought it was going to, because I mean, it says as it says, as you know, in the Bible, it says he's one of the conversations that he has with God. He's talking about how Eliezer is going to get everything that's mine, and Isaac isn't going to get any. Well, I don't have a kid.
Yeah. So that's not, that's nothing like antebellum slavery. It was practiced in the South.
Yeah.
So
I've not fully understood, but yeah, I just started to try and figure that one out. Thanks.
All right. So we got Israel Rise came in. You can unmute yourself, and we could see if you could make your argument better. By the way, Vocab, he tells you to go to Hosea 1. Doesn't say anything else. He just told you to go to Hosea 1.
Well, I have a question. Yisrael Rise, you said all praise and glory to Yahushai. Why do you say Yisrael, which is modern Israeli Hebrew pronunciation, but then you say Yahushai, which is Lashon Kodash? Which language or version of Hebrew do you hold to? Why is your name modern Israeli Hebrew, but you're using Yahushai? Because you're mixing two different forms of Hebrew. Because if you believe Yisrael is the correct pronunciation for Israel, then you shouldn't be using Yahushai. That's what I'd be very, very interested in. Yisrael Rise.
Well, I've unmuted him. He keeps muting himself.
I guess he doesn't want to talk.
We'll try this again. I'll unmute him one more time.
Did you understand my point, what I was trying to say, Andrew?
Yes.
Because Yahushai is what they call Jesus, Yeshua, right? And so that's how Lashon Kodash would do it. But so yeah, he's not going to answer. He just wants me to, I don't think we're going to sit here and read all of Hosea 1. He's saying read all of Hosea 1.
And he dropped out. There you go.
Well, maybe someone could look at Hosea 1 if they'd like, and we could talk about it. I don't want to if someone else could read it, I could eat a rolled taco real quick or something.
Here's the problem. You could read Hosea 1, but just saying Hosea 1 is not an argument, because the issue is, what about Hosea 1? How is it he's interpreting Hosea 1? What's the argument he's even made? What's he saying that we should find in Hosea 1? I mean, we could go a lot of different places. Jason Manning, I think, got it right. He said he tapped out. That's a Brazilian jiu-jitsu term. So he came in and tapped out. He didn't get very far. Vocab use.
Isn't that what they name the kids? I would have thought that would have sunk him.
Yeah, well, I think Vocab, your first question must have scared him. He said that before he came in chat on YouTube, he was saying that he could provide a better argument than you, but
he was saying it was an argument for what? For the hardcore slavery? Is that what he was saying?
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Okay,
I can read them out real fast, and I can read them just like what they say or how they say it. The word of the Lord that came to Hosea, the son of Beri.
I don't know. That'd be that.
That's right.
That's right.
Yeah, so I'm not sure what his argument was. And that's this is, let me give this as a learning thing for folks. And sometimes Christians do this as well. And this is a bad thing to do. Do not think that just by shouting out a citation of scripture, that is always an answer to an argument. Okay. Mm. If I just give you a citation, that is not an argument. If we're having a discussion and you say, well, look here, this is going to answer it, and you give a citation, and that directly answers it, that might be one thing. But a lot of the times what you end up finding is that people give citations, and the real issue is it comes down to how you're interpreting that passage, or what you're seeing, how that passage applies to this. And if you just give the citation, that's not a refutation. And a lot of people do argue this way, and it's a bad way to argue. The citation by itself is not enough. You have to give an argument. And that's why we're struggling now with because we don't know what his argument was. We only know Hosea 1. What about Hosea 1? Don't know.
I think I'm seeing the idea that he's trying to say. I think he's talking about the lineage and such, because he's saying in Hosea 1:8 it says, when she weaned no mercy, she conceived and bore a son, and the Lord said, call his name not my people, for you are not my people, and I am not your God.
I think he might be saying that's evidence or proof of some kind of temporary rejection for Israel. And so that's proving that they would no longer be clearly identified as the Hebrew Israelites. And I think he would want to go to the other part of Hosea to say, look, but then there's a time where God is calling them back to himself, or saying they're his people again. Maybe he was saying something about this is prophetic in regards to Israel losing their connection to God and then getting it back. It might be. But of course, here's the thing with this. This needs to be interpreted in light of Romans. That's what they don't like to do. Because when I go there and I show them, they'll say, so wait, you're trying to tell me the guys who were not his people and now are Gentiles? I say, well, what else are you going to do with Romans? And that's where they get into this weird thing where a lot of them take the word Gentile in any kind of scripture that indicates something positive towards Gentiles. And guess what they do? They say that simply means a scattered Israelite in a Gentile state of mind. Lost Israelites is what they're saying it means. Whenever it's contextually helpful, though. But they don't do it all the time. They'll say, and then if you laugh at that, they'll say, well, don't you believe that context should determine the interpretation? Now, I'm giving you some of the more sophisticated guys' arguments, because a lot of the guys don't do that. But I try to say, here's the best, because let me make some predictions. Hebrew Israelites are going to grow. And like every other religious movement, as they go on, they change. One of the things that causes these groups to change is substantial interaction with Christian critics.
Mm-hmm.
When that happens, some of the groups will develop more sophisticated arguments, and they'll do things like rip off Jehovah's Witness arguments, rip off Islamic arguments that are helpful, rip off actually some perhaps in some
Mormons.
cases,
Yeah.
even maybe the anti-missionary movements among Jewish people, things like that, and every now and then develop some of their own. Tap into Hebrew roots movements and then take British or Anglo-Israelite movements and then flip them around. So they've got a lot of resources actually to get a whole cadre of more sophisticated bad argumentation. My point is that's going to happen because I'm seeing their changes in the past 3 years where some of them are becoming more sophisticated. So here's my point. It's true there's silliness that goes on, but watch out. People don't always join religions or whatever it is they're getting a part of strictly for intellectual reasons. There can be powerful emotionally and morally felt needs that the religion satisfies. And the intellectual arguments almost become an afterthought. But it catches up to where those intellectual arguments aspect of it become more sophisticated over time. So my point is they're going to do this and you'll see it, and we'll just have to kind of be ahead of them and constantly shutting each one down like a game of whack-a-mole. But I just encourage people to watch out because you may think they're the eisegetical underdog, and they are, but these groups can creep up on you, and we just got to be prepared. That's sort of what I see in the future. And so the apologetic community should be aware, at least those who are engaging with this.
Well, this is done that people often don't understand. When I talk about Islam, you end up having this a lot where logic, when you get them to a point where logically it doesn't make sense, they don't care. I mean, they'll throw logic out the window. You're seeing this. I mean, here, this guy that came in that sent the email, and I'm just looking back because I was trying to see if he gave an argument. And he ended up saying, I'm going to email Vocab an even more legit argument. Now, that's interesting if we parse that, because what he's saying is the email he sent to me is not legit. Yeah, he's going to send you Vocab one that's more legit, but yet the one that he sent me is based on taking one word, Adam, and instead looking up the Hebrew for Adham and saying they're the same. They're two different words. That's like me saying, the word. I'm trying to think of two words that are close. Save and slave. That they have, that we could just use them interchangeably because they only one letter off. They'd have a huge difference in meaning. And so that's his argument. So maybe he'll send you a more legit argument. But let me ask you this. When you're saying the more scholarly, how do they deal with it? I mean, the key verse that they have is the Deuteronomy 28 passage. I think it's 50. It's the last verse, but I think it's 58 or 59. That's the key passage. Now, you're saying that some of them are going to argue that we should look in context, but if you look at that passage in context, I don't see how you could possibly get to the point of where they try to argue for this being a prophecy.
Well, I mean, I wasn't necessarily saying academic, although there's a couple guys who try to dip into academic sources every now and then, but sophisticated, like more steps, because a lot of times Hebrew Israelites are used to catching people on the street and being able to drop them in a metaphorical sense with one punch. So when Christians have responses, they become over time more adept at being like, oh, I need to have a counter response to this. It's taking them time, but they're getting there. And then they start borrowing all their arguments. Some of them even rip off Christian apologetics and just change a couple things because consistency is not a hallmark of the religion. I think, though, what the guy was trying to say with Hosea 1, I texted a friend about this, and it makes sense just briefly. what they try to do is to say Hosea 1 and 2 are clearly referring to Israelites. So then when Romans 9 quotes those texts, Romans 9 has to be referring only to Israelites. And that is the proof text they use for the method of turning the word Gentile sometime into an Israelite. Instead of allowing Paul to define his terms where he's clearly saying, those who are not my people will be my people, the Gentiles, they go back to Hosea and say, no, this is only the context here of these folks being Israelites. So when Paul quotes it, that means it's saying these are Israelites. And so it's a way to basically say God is saying there in Romans 9, the Israelites who are afar off are now going to be part of the proper body, because a lot of them basically view that that's what's happening. Like that's what they're doing right now. They're sort of fulfilling that prophecy. So I don't know if that makes sense. It's almost like they retcon it for the nerds in the audience who know what retcon is. But I think that's what he's probably trying to do with Hosea 1 and 2. Does that make sense, Andrew, what I'm trying to explain, or no?
Well, it's the first time I'm hearing it. I'm trying to understand it in their perspective, and I can see that it would, I think, fit with their perspective.
Right.
I don't think it would fit with the context.
No, of course not, because you have to not allow Paul to define what his terms and follow his own argumentation of all of the Pauline letters, but even within that little Romans 9 through 11 pericope. And but that's one of the ways they do it, is like limiting the interpretation based upon the understanding of Hosea that they would utilize, and then saying this. So this is just another way to talk about lost Israelites, Gentiles. The proof is Hosea 1 and 2 did it. Paul's doing the same thing as in Romans.
Well, let me throw this out for folks to, when it comes to interpreting scripture, there's two key things when we're going to interpret scripture. The first is context. And I think a lot of people understand that. You have to read it in context. The context defines the meaning of words, the meaning of phrases. If you say something that is an idiom, that you're going to see that from the context. If I say I'm so hungry I can eat a cow, you don't think I could literally eat a cow. You're going to recognize that as an idiom because it doesn't make sense. But just those words by themselves. But there's a second thing that Vocab just mentioned that's a second most important thing when it comes to interpreting scripture, and that's called authorial intent. What did the author mean by what he wrote? And if you heard what Vocab just said, it's, well, what did Paul mean by his words? Paul knows the meaning of his words. Paul had a meaning for his words. Our job is to understand what Paul meant by his words, not to say, what does this mean to us today? Or how could I use Paul's words to make an argument that I wish the Bible said? When you do something like that, and you take the Bible and you try to see how it fits into something that you want to believe, you do not have God's word, you have man's word. To give a paraphrase quote that's translated from John Calvin, Calvin had said something about that if you twist God's word, you have nothing but man's word. And that's what these guys have. They have man's word, which with a lot of wishful thinking. And Vocab, you really hit the nail on the head. What I find with many of them, it is an emotional thing. This is why when you try to argue with them, and bring out the text of scripture, and a lot of times you sit there and try to explain context, and they really don't care. They don't care a whit about that. It's more an emotional thing. For many of them, it's something that they're trying to have a superiority, I want to say, or other groups of people. That's that othering you were mentioning.
Well, folks who study this, as far as what you might call Black religion in America, recognize that one of the common features is to respond to historical white racism or white supremacy encroachment upon societal issues. And the second is to have a properly framed sense of identity. Since if you have what looks like to be some kind of Christianity that says it's okay if you're Black and we're going to make you sit up in the balcony, or it's okay if we say you can't read the Bible unless your master is present, and that kind of thing happening, having a response to that. And so if you look at, for example, the Nation of Islam, it tries to answer those questions, and so it gives a response to those questions, to those struggles, to those challenges, and then it adds another component, which is not only that, but the doctrine is wrong, and then there will come a doctrinal critique element as well. And so Hebrew Israelism does that as well. And so, we've got a document that's part of our founding document in the United States that has slaves as essentially counting as 3/5 a person, court decisions that say black folks are property, separate but equal, but it was never equal and always just separate. And you look at this, and it's laws and there's redlining, which is if you're black, you cannot move into a certain area. And this is actually done by city planners. I mean, this stuff really happened. And then sometimes there weren't literal red lines and maps, but there were invisible lines you couldn't cross. And if you did, you got in trouble, like the 1951 Cicero riots, where 4,000 white folks attacked one black family moving into an apartment in Cicero. It happened in 1951. It's unbelievable. You have all that happen. And then someone says, see this book that's important? This book's about you, your descendants of the people spoken about in here in this book. And guess what? It doesn't just teach you to, quote, love everybody like you've been taught. This teaches you that you're better than everybody. And in the future, we'll build a nation in which you rule over them. And the way we can get there is by returning to God and our culture. How do we do that? By keeping the law, statutes, and commandments in order to begin to raise up our nation. And then when we do that, God will come back and do the rest. And then instead of it being Gentile heaven like it is now, it's going to be Gentile hell and Israelite heaven. And that guy's name that just came in here reflects that. Yisrael rise. And in Lashon Kodash, it would be Kwam Yasharallah. Kwam Yasharallah means rise Israel. When do Hebrew Israelites out on the street say Kwam Yasharallah? One main time. They say it other times, but there's one main time where the Hebrew Israelites out on the street say Kwam Yasharallah. So the rising of Israel. It's whenever they get a member of another nation to bow down and kiss their boots. That's when the cries of Kwam Yasharallah are generally offered forth. And it's a sign to them of the vassal relationship that should be proper. And so it's happening. It's starting to happen is sort of the way it is, which is the opposite of what's been happening to our people prior to this. So, theology is one thing, but this is different than Mormonism because there's other factors involved that aren't quite as present in other religions because some of the questions being answered are different. And I just encourage apologists to understand that if they're going to get involved with this. And I think we should always be open to learning new facts about history and learning new ways to be empathetic without empathizing for people's bad doctrine. And so I just mentioned that to say there's a lot going on, sort of. And that's why the religion's growing. It's not shrinking.
Well, I think it's grown because there is a lot of hard feelings, I'm trying to think of the right word, but it's an emotional issue, the whole issue of racism, and this, I do think, feeds into it. It says this is the same superiority that we saw in Nazi Germany, where they could then suppress other people because they're superior. They have this right to do it because they're better. And so that becomes something that I think is appealing for many of them. I don't think they're doing it because they've studied the scriptures and they see this clearly taught. I think that they want it to be true because it makes them feel superior. It makes them feel better about the life they have in America, and they're going to have an even better one, and everyone's going to be subjective to them.
Well, they might just simply say, yeah, and that's what your people have been doing to my people for the past 400 years.
Yeah. It wasn't my people because my people never did that.
Well, I mean,
people in the 40s were slaves.
People in the 40s were slaves.
Yeah.
I mean, well, there were Jewish slave owners. There were Jewish slave
Yeah,
owners.
Yeah,
Andrew.
but it would there were some. But my family wouldn't have been like if tracing my family back, we weren't in countries where slavery. I mean, if you go far enough back, but I wouldn't have been. My family wouldn't have been in America during the slave period, and we would have been in countries that didn't have slavery. So I did. So when they say that, well, you're responsible, I'm like, how?
Well, reincarnation.
So okay. So let me ask you this. So with if the view of reincarnation, would they argue that everyone reincarnates of the same melanin count?
You can't jump ethnicities, and in fact, most of them teach you can't tribe jump either.
Really?
If you're Levi, you've got to stay Levi. Although there's a little bit of debate about some of them about that particular issue. Can you tribe jump? But all of them agree you cannot jump ethnicities. It doesn't mean you're going to look the same or anything like that, but you can't jump ethnicities.
Okay, so let's see. So you have Adam and Eve. And
well.
So are all of the spirits born before Adam and Eve were created?
Well,
right?
so here's the thing. If you study, and this is again, I've just simply had to study this. Like, for example, this is a book on Cambridge. It's called The Forging of Races. And I'll just read one thing from the back of the book. Fixing his attention on the changing relationship between race and theology in the Protestant Atlantic world between 1600 and 2000, Kidd shows that while the Bible itself is colorblind, its interpreters have imported racial significance into the scriptures. And so you look during the Age of Empires, and you find that the Hamitic hypothesis and the curse of Cain, all very significant, and a lot of interpretation and even pop understanding of the Bible in certain ways. So sometimes those interpretations got really bad. And the thing is, I've had to read this stuff. You read commentators and you're like, oh my gosh, where they basically say there's no way, this is not everybody, this is some, but you see this. There's no way the Africans could have come from Adam and Eve. And they start developing no longer, monogenesis for everybody. They'll have different sources for different people groups. And the reason is because, supposedly the European is shocked at the inferiority of the African during the colonial era. So even the missionaries sometimes would posit these folks must have come from somewhere else, basically. Or they would actually sometimes mix and match evolutionary concepts, even Christians. And the thing is, this stuff it's in the records when you start reading it. It's really saddening. So they would do things like that. My point by saying all that is, some of the Hebrew Israelites do the same thing, where you just mentioned Adam and Eve. Some of them have Adam and Eve being proto-Israelites and progenitors for Hebrew Israelites, but not for anybody else. And some of them get pretty bizarre with how they accomplish this. I'll just share this. And in fact, I don't know if you guys heard this. Last week here in Phoenix, a Hebrew Israelite thought his wife was having an affair, and so he killed her, 2 of his 3 daughters, and his brother, who was his camp leader. I spent significant time with that camp called Yahushai's Servants in Phoenix, or Yahushai's Servants in Israel. Depends which day you ask them. And they taught me this interpretation. I didn't know where they were going for it until the end. And I was like, are you guys serious? Here's what they teach. Part of the sin of Eve and Adam was intermingling with the other nations in some way. Some of them will say that. And then when they hide among the trees, remember it says they hid among the trees. They teach the trees are the other peoples, the other nations. And you'll say, wait a minute. And here's the way it works. They'll say, well, Adam and Eve are one strand of people, but there were other people present. For example, that explains how Cain got his situation where there was already people present, other nations. But Adam and Eve are sort of a direct line to Abraham, but they're proto-Israelites. That's a word they actually use. They use the phrase proto-Israelite. These guys who get into this interpretation. And if you laugh at it, they'll say, oh, well, don't you understand that the Bible identifies sometimes trees or bushes as people? And you'll say, what? and they'll go like a tree planted beside the water is a man who, and they go to places where they can kind of show that some kind of simile or metaphor. And they'll say, so go back here in Genesis, these trees are actually this sort of Adam and Eve's of the other nations, and Adam and Eve are hiding among them. And my point is, they'll have, now this is the one West interpretation. These are the guys on the street. If you talk to like other Hebrew Israelites, they'll say that's crazy. They're not going to agree with it. They have strong disagreement. However, they still will call them their brother. They'll still say they're their brother. They'll say their behavior's off, or their tactics aren't good, or some of their theology is wrong, but they'll still consider them a brother in some meaningful way to them.
Well, see, I mean, the thing that, I mean, this is where it gets confusing because, so let's say the reincarnation view. If you have Adam and Eve, then, okay, did Adam get reincarnated as an Israelite or a Hispanic or, Arabian, right? Because you have two people, unless, like you're saying, they believe there are more people on the earth, or I guess the other way would be if they start believing in things that Mormons believe, that God created all the spirits and is just giving them bodies. And then when they get that body, they stay within that tribe and that ethnic group. I mean, I'm guessing that's how they'd have to argue. It seems like a strange argument. And, if they're going to, and this is a thing that I always do when I get guys that say, like you're saying, they're going to say, well, trees or bushes can refer to people. Okay, if you're going to make that argument that a tree can be, you have to show why in Genesis 1, 2, and 3, or this would actually be Genesis 3, why a tree is actually a person. Because I get Genesis 2, 1 and 2, when God creates plants, they're really people. They would probably must say, oh, these are the other people groups maybe, but the thing that would be a problem is then you must be consistent. Then every tree must be people.
Was the fig tree that Jesus cursed?
That's exactly where I'm going to go.
That's where they get into, they'll try to say, don't you believe in context? Or that's where they might bring in line upon line, precept upon precept to show that this is a proper interpretive method. Or sometimes if they're frustrated, they'll say, you know what? This is why Gentiles shouldn't even be picking up this book. This book's not even for you anyway. It's not given for you to teach. It's not given for you to interpret. You're not a spiritual people. You're a carnal people. You think you know something, but you can't interpret this book anyway. So you might as well just put the Bible down, go have a bunch of sex and do whatever you crazy Gentiles like to do, and just wait for your slavery, because that's all you got to look forward to. Again, these are the One West guys on the street. And the reason I mention them primarily is because those are the guys you're kind of running into, because I saw you street preaching and stuff like that. That's a kind of guy out there. But Zadok, for example, he would disagree with a lot of this, and he would say, Vocab's at it again. He always takes the bad seeds of Israel and he lumps them on all together, and that doesn't make any sense, because Hebrew Israelite is simply an ethnic designation. What kind of person takes an ethnic designation and then starts talking about religion? Hebrew Israelite is an ethnicity. They could have all kinds of different religions, something like that. And of course, that claim, of course, is circular. For him to say Hebrew Israelite is an ethnic designation, it's based upon his understanding of a religious claim. So even him saying that, it's circular. No, because you saying that is assuming what we're talking about, which is the Hebrew Israelite is an ethnic designation strictly, because that's what you're holding to as part of your religious claim. It's not a religious claim. Why do you say religious claim? Because you're using the Bible to try to justify that's the main way you're giving your justification for this belief. That's a religious claim proper. So yeah, that's kind of how it is. But if like Zadok watches the show, he'll say, this is why people don't trust Vocab, because he always tries to lump everybody in together and all that kind of stuff. Although I try to be careful, because there's no sense in lying or giving people bad information. You know what I'm saying? But you listen to your average Hebrew Israelite, they say the term Sunday Christian, and they literally just mean all Christians. And so, like, if, as far as being careful, we're very far ahead in that category. Sunday Christian describes all Christians.
Well, I had, and I think you saw some of the video on this when I was out in New York City. I had been basically we had someone that was doing some open air evangelism, and we were training them and helping them. And so he's up there, and he got a Black Hebrew Israelite. And so I started to kind of mouth to him, ask him this, because it was, for me, it was training him. And then all of a sudden his buddies came in, and I realized, okay, time for you to come down, and I'll get up and deal with this, because there's a specific way to deal with them, especially in the open air like that. And he was going to get overwhelmed, because they'll come in a mob mentality. You got to identify one and just deal with the one, and try to get the others to be quiet and show that they're being rude, because that's what they'll do. They try to outshout you, and it's a common thing. Now, the interesting thing with it was when I took that, and then I did a podcast about that incident and played some of the video clips, and you hear the audio, you hear the way I'm trying to teach people how to deal with these guys on the street. We actually had a group, and I'd have to look it up, and I should probably still have the lawyer's thing somewhere. And I could probably tell you which group, but we actually got a letter from an attorney telling us to take that down, because I stated that some groups believe that they'll enslave whites and rape our women, and this group doesn't believe that. It was something like Israel. It was like ICCC, I think, or something like that.
IUIC.
Yeah. Okay.
I would love to see that letter, please.
Okay.
Please. I had a similar situation where when I began my doctoral studies at Talbot, which I've had to discontinue for now. Hopefully one day I get back there, because this thing is kind of taking over my life. But when I was first starting, and I did like one interview, I didn't know it was going to be such a big deal. And I talked about what I was doing and stuff and studying it and whatever. The Melanated People's Council of Elders, I don't know what that is, sent a very long, professional, legal-like looking PDF document email to Talbot's dean, basically threatening legal action against Talbot if I was allowed to proceed with my doctoral project, because it was racist. And they were quoting me, giving time codes from it was unbelievable. And I had to talk to the dean, and he was like, well, actually, I had to talk to the president, but long story. Anyways, he said, I've never seen anything like this. Like, we've never had a situation where, like a student was threatened by it was bizarre, right?
Yeah. Why? I mean, we got a letter to the ministry telling us we had to cease and desist. We had to pull that down because their group doesn't believe that. Yeah. And basically our attorney said, well, if you listen to the podcast, and he gave the timestamps, he said some believe this. And I said to the attorney, I said, if you want, we got video that's on a YouTube channel of a Hebrew Israelite where they're saying exactly what I said they say. Now, I didn't say they all believe that. And this is where you're saying we do have to sometimes be careful, and someone like Zadok will call you out if you say this. But unfortunately, this may be more the majority that you're going to see on the streets believing this. Maybe not the majority of them, but
right. And that's difficult to see. No one really truly kind of knows the numbers, but as far as on the street, yeah, that's who you're gonna, kind of see. And but yeah, I want to see that letter. That's fascinating.
I will see, I'll send it to you.
They've got into some of that. Some of the groups are starting to get into mild Church of Scientology tactics like that, because we've had some other situations like that. And so, it's basically, this is not a group most apologists, I think, want to get involved with. Basically, it's not real fun unless you think stuff like this is fun. Yeah. And
you basically have to like really want to be beaten up and torture yourself to enjoy dealing with this group. Yeah,
or it's like, you just have a certain vibe that's like, it's all good, bring it on. Like the way David Wood feels about, hardcore Islam that he deals with, like he's perfectly happy, and so I kind of have a similar mentality. I'm like, all right, it is what it is, guys. So I listen to videos where they're talking about me and stuff and just shake my head and laugh. Every now and then they say or do something that genuinely bothers me, but it's few and far between.
Yeah. So we're gonna be wrapping up, and I know I don't know if Vocab you see any of the inside chat here, but John's gonna do an after show. I don't know if you want to join that or not. Usually that's more of an open discussion where anyone can join and
A free for all, really. Yeah.
I am okay to join, but maybe some other time. Here's why. Remember, I was reading you the stuff that I was writing. I am behind on that, and I have to get back to the writing. And I wanted to come on for a little bit with you guys, but I gotta.
Yeah. I know you want to come on for an hour. You've been on for an hour and a half, and I know I still gotta be teaching tomorrow to Good Friday service, and I'm still not done. So I know I'm going to have to do that.
I'll throw the link out for the hangout on the council's website, Facebook page, and I'll just see if anyone wants to join in. If no one joins in, then hey,
send me if you could drop the link in the chat here. The outside chat if you want.
And also my channel is premiering a little 12-minute interview with Jeff Durbin about Jesus being the Messiah, and so I want to be able to be free when it premieres. So well,
listen, before you go, Vocab, give it, how can folks get a hold of you, find out more of material? I mean, they can go get your book, Obama versus Hebrew Israelites.
Yeah, if you just type in Vocab alone at Amazon, you'll find the book
now, right?
Yeah, I'm working on a second one, but will it ever get finished? I'm working on it.
Not if I keep getting you in here.
Yeah,
Vocab. The only thing that I want to say to you is, Muhammad was white.
Yep, white prophet power. With Muhammad anyway.
That is the funniest video ever. That was just the most hilarious discussion. I mean, they didn't know what to do. They were just like,
no, I mean, that was quite a day. All right, guys, I got to go.
All right. Well, Vocab, thanks for coming in. And for folks, as we wrap up, just thank everyone who came in. Unfortunately, the guy who wrote that email, Israel Rise, didn't rise to the occasion to actually stay in here. I mean, we didn't even get to hear his voice. Vocab asked him one question, and he bailed. He tapped out. You could probably figure out why that might be if you were here for the beginning and you heard me read his email, actually go through the Hebrew, and you realize that the arguments he made just are not logical, valid. It's basically he was trying to do a form of a fallacy of equivocation, sort of, but doing it on the sounds of words. So, but folks, if you're interested in finding out more of the podcasts we have here, the shows that we do, we have a podcast called Apologetics Live. You could subscribe to that. It's free. You just go click on the link so you can listen to every one. They download to your podcast app. And we thank Vocab for coming on.
You're welcome. God bless.
Yeah, I hope everyone gets to see Vocab really knows his stuff in this, and that's why earlier today when I was going to respond to this, I shot him a quick text to say, "Hey, you want to come in?" Because as I think you guys saw, he can address these things much better than I can, for sure. This is not an easy topic or group to research because they don't have things written down. They don't have like one clear belief system. They're so fragmented. It's so difficult. So, really, if you could find out how to help Vocab in getting this out here, because this group is growing. It became more known after that recent incident with the kids who were at I think it was a Trump rally, I forget what it was. But they got national news because supposedly this Christian high school group was going after the Black Hebrew Israelites, and when you actually watch a real video, it was reversed. But the thing that we see is that this group is growing, and there's not a lot of people that are willing to do the research. Like Vocab said, it's not something that a lot of people want to study. It's not something easy to study. So if you guys can help support a guy like Vocab in what he's doing, it is a benefit to all of us who end up having to deal with these Hebrew Israelites as they continue to grow. So go check out the work he's doing, get his book. That will help him. That'll help you. I'm going to go. I have not gotten my own copy, but I plan to order it tonight because I clearly need it. I deal with them a bunch. But folks, this is a ministry of striving fraternity. We put this on. We hope it's helpful, educational to you. I want to encourage you to go check out the rest of the podcasts on the Christian podcast community. We have a growing list, and it's going to be growing a lot more. We have several podcasters that have already applied and want to join. So if you're paying attention to the Christian podcast community, you're going to see a bunch of new podcasts coming out on that feed. And in there, you could just go to christianpodcastcommunity.org and you can see all the ones that we have there. And it's going to be a growing list. And so we appreciate that. If you could support us by downloading and listening to them, by hitting the subscribe button on whatever app you have, go search for them and add it to your library. And so want to encourage you to continue praying for Matt Slick as he's out trying to take care of packing. Some of you may or may not know, his wife is basically can't do any of the work in packing up their home. He's trying to do the entire thing himself while still working, while doing everything that he's doing. And so they're going to be trying to be moving. I think the date now got pushed out because they just weren't ready. There's some things with their health insurance that becomes a problem if they move too early. Their deductible starts all over. So they're having to stay there until that can get figured out. So hopefully Matt and I will both be back next week. We'll see. But if not, if you're watching this live or listening to it, it'll be tomorrow from when we do it live, is Resurrection Sunday. I hope that you will think about and put in the forefront of your mind the fact that Christ rose from the dead, but he didn't just rise from the dead for no reason. He rose from the dead, which vindicated that he was God Almighty, who came to earth as a man, died on a cross as a payment for our sin, paying the price that we owe, that we could never pay. God himself paid it on that cross, and he died, was buried as he predicted. Jesus Christ said that he would raise himself from the dead 3 days later, and that's exactly what he did. Dead people do nothing when they're just a man. They rot. But when you're God, you can raise yourself from the dead, vindicating that he was God and that he can offer to you the forgiveness of sin. If you repent, that means to turn away in your mind and your thinking, turn from trusting yourself as a good person, turn from your good works, and turn to what Jesus Christ did on the cross as a payment of sin. I encourage you to do that today. Until next week, remember to strive to make today an eternal day for the glory of God.